We are back with Antoine Craigwell. Antoine, in 2012, you produced a documentary, You're Not Alone, and facilitated discussion forums on depression in black gay men. Well, let me ask you, how did you meet Stanley Bennett Clay, who wrote this script?
In about April or May of 2012, I was going to a performance at the Phase and Firehouse Theatre, and he came out to the subway. We came out to the subway at the same time at 125th Street. We recognized each other and started to talk, and then the idea hit me that I'm doing this documentary and I may need somebody to write a script, and I knew that he is a playwright. He's written a number of plays that have been on and off Broadway. So we started talking about it, and I asked him if he'd be interested in collaborating on this documentary that I was working on. I had already filmed the pilot, the trailer, and that kind of stuff. So it was now a matter of going into greater production and fleshing out the film. He looked at, I had done the interviews as well, the preliminary interviews of all the black gay men that I needed. So what I did is sent him the raw footage and had him write a script based on the stories that the guys were telling. So it's not just a matter of talking heads, but it was talking heads interspersed with dramatizations of the stories they were telling. So, for example, there was one story of a guy talking about being a drug user and being a drug courier. He would he would deliver coke and sell coke, and he didn't feel he had a place in this world because his mother didn't accept him. And so he climbed to the top of a building high on coke, and he was going to jump. And some of his friends knew, and they came and they tried to talk him down. And he ended up going into a psychiatric facility where he was able to get the substance abuse help as well as mental health counseling treatment. So we dramatized that. So that was dramatized. There's also the incidents of a young black gay man who is now becoming an extremely well-accomplished actor who was sexually abused by his father. And so he described that experience, including talking to his mother about it and her reaction, and we dramatized that. So we had a dramatization of an older man simulating sexually abusing the son, is to convey that, as well as him telling his mother and the mother's reaction. So there were a number of different stories that came out from those interviews that he then wrote the script for.
I'm curious though, but you're a writer.
Yes.
Why did you not write it yourself?
Because I didn't know how.
So
and I didn't want to try to attempt to do something. I wrote the questions.
Right.
I prepared the questions for the interviews. So technically, we are both co-directors of the film. But in terms of the agreement of my engaging him to work on the film, he gets the billing as a director.
Okay.
And for legal reasons, purposes, I have to say that.
Yes.
Because there's an agreement between us that in perpetuity for the film, he gets the billing as a director, even though I may have written the questions and directed the interviews themselves, which he had nothing to do with.
How has this documentary changed you, if at all?
The interesting thing about this that I've come to realize is, let me step back for a second, because the documentary usurped another project. Originally it was supposed to be a book. I had started working on a book. about black gay men talking about their experience, their stories about how they became depressed and considered suicide. But of course, we know the publishing industry is white owned and operated. The agents are mostly all white owned and operated. The literary agents and the publishers, and so it was difficult to find a publisher for a book that addresses black, gay, and mental health. And those are three no-nos. So I decided that let me take some of the guys who interviewed for the book, ask them if they'd be willing to sit in front of a camera like I'm doing now and talk about their stories. And that's how the documentary came to be. But one of the things that bothered me considerably about doing the documentary, but even going ahead and continuing work on the book, is that the passion that drives the creativity to produce gets taken away because the commercialization that's involved, because of the business side of it that's involved. When I was doing this documentary, we finished the filming at the end of August of 2012. The guys who did the filming, I hired them to do the documentary. For some strange reason, I couldn't get in touch with them. They had my footage, all the raw footage, interviews, dramatizations, everything, and I couldn't get it from them. They were insisting that I pay them these thousands of dollars. So they literally held my footage hostage because my plan was I needed to get at least a rough draft, show it to a panel of mental health professionals to get okay, to say, well, we're on the right track, show it to focus groups, and then to release it in November. We're at the end of August here, I have all these different steps to go through. They're holding my footage. I had to hire an attorney to compel them to give me my footage and pay them the money that they were worth, not the money that they were calling for, because by this time they had inflated it. And I was like, I just want to step up. I just want to get my footage and walk. And I hired a new editor who sat down with the director, and they edited the film in a week. So between September to October, I was able to continue to be on schedule, which is I had it screened before a panel of mental health professionals. Then I went into focus groups. I did 4 focus groups around New York City and New Jersey. And then it was finalized for release in November. That experience in dealing with the attorney to get back my footage changed my whole outlook towards the creative side of doing anything. Because what I became aware of, and I'm also aware of this when I should do the book, is that yes, you bring passion and creativity into the work to get it done. When you've done it, it's no longer yours. It's just a product or a tool. Otherwise, you might as well just put this in a drawer and leave it to collect dust. Because if you wanted to see the light of day and to get any traction, it becomes a legal and business endeavor. It becomes a product. And so that, as a backdrop to anything, kind of takes away from the creativity and the passion to do anything.
Well said. What was one of the most troubling facts about depression you discovered while doing this documentary?
How insidious it is. That somebody who is dealing with depression it is not easily visible. But to understand also and this is one of the most startling things for me, is that somebody who's dealing with depression, it's not their fault. You cannot be held responsible for this. As I did the research and the reading of the literature, and when I speak about literature, I'm meaning academic research studies, literature into depression, I came to understand that there are a combination of two factors that become one that leads to somebody descending into depression. And a descent into depression can happen quickly or it can happen over a prolonged period. So, for example, somebody who may be using LSD or coke or some other narcotic or psychotropic drug may suddenly feel he wants to fly. He's never before considered suicide. He's never before been suicidal. But he suddenly decides he wants to fly, so he goes on top of the Verrazano Bridge or on top of the lighthouse in Georgetown, and he wants to fly and he jumps. That is situational depression. That's situational suicide. Because it's been triggered by the drug that he used. Now, somebody who is more long-term, it builds over a period of time. As one of the guys in the documentary said, that depression is sometimes like a fog in your brain. It's like a pain in your brain itself that you can't seem to get rid of. I remember in September of 2012 when I was doing the documentary, I remember for a week, because not knowing what I was going to do, how am I going to proceed with this film, I felt that I didn't want to continue. So I lay on my couch in my apartment, and I would only get up and go to the bathroom or go to the kitchen to get something to eat, and I can plot my movements in a kind of linear fashion to the bathroom, the kitchen, the bedroom, the couch, bathroom, and I did not want to do anything. I did not want to move. And the George Washington Bridge is not very far from where I live. And prior in part of my research, I found out from talking to one of the fire chiefs in the area that on average, 2 people a month jump off the George Washington Bridge. I hadn't a plan on what I was going to do, but I just knew I didn't want to be here anymore. But then, I remember I had to get up to turn on the light, a lamp over the couch. And as I raised up to turn on the light, the thought hit me. But Antoine, how can you be going around the country talking about depression and talking about the neurochemical imbalances in the brain and so forth, and this is what you're experiencing, you don't know what's going on? Then it's when it hit me that what I was experiencing was a neurochemical imbalance in my brain, coupled with all of the negative things that I have heard in my life coming back to me in a flood. And so my brain and my mind was telling me, you don't want to be here right now. And I said, you know what? If I had been going around the country talking about this, and this is what's happening to me, then I can pull myself together. And since then, there have been occasional moments, but then I always remember that when those moments come, that in fact, it's what's going on in my brain that's causing me to think and feel this way. And so what I would say to someone who's experiencing this kind of feeling, that you don't want to be here anymore, you don't want to be on this planet anymore, you don't want to live anymore, that no one cares about you, no one understands. And I can talk about that understanding. Let me just come back, and I can come back to that. But is first of all, identify someone you can speak with professionally and confidentially. But more importantly, and I come back to this, what I talked earlier about acceptance. And accept that in fact, what is going on in your brain, what is going on with you, the way you're feeling, is not your fault.
That is important.
It's not your fault. You should not blame yourself. And little do you know that the way you're feeling, there are many others who feel the same way you do. That in fact, because of society's stigma, because of the shame and the embarrassment and the humiliation that we surround somebody who's dealing with a mental health issue. Because remember, when I talked about New Amsterdam and the Madhouse, those were people who were put there. I don't recall seeing people coming to visit those people. So when you were put away, you were literally put away. You were cut off from family. And so we have this sense in our minds that anyone who's dealing with a mental health issue, especially depression, is siloized. We are dealing with this, we are in this alone. Nobody's ever had this experience. Nobody knows what I'm going through. Nobody can understand what I'm going through. So I got to deal with this on my own, and I don't know what to do. So what I'm saying is that when someone is experiencing any form of mental health crisis or issue, least of all depression, is to realize that you are not in this alone. There are others who experience it. The experiences, the circumstances, they may vary, they may be different, but they're all very much the same. And all it takes for you to do is to reach out. Find somebody you can talk to. Now, this is where it becomes problematic. Because I was just in Guyana 2 weeks ago, a week, 2 weeks ago. And I sat in the office of a friend of mine, Joel Simpson, who is the managing director for SASD. And we were, himself, Diane Madre from CADVA, and Let the Women Speak, and myself, we were putting together our presentation for the Diaspora Conference, because we did a panel discussion at the Diaspora Conference. Part of my focus was on mental health. That Joel's was going to be talking about LGBT rights and human rights issues, and Diane would be talking about domestic violence. And Joel pulled out a handwritten letter off of his desk, and he gave it to me. He says, "Read this." It was a letter from a dear friend of mine who committed suicide in September, October of 2015, Zanita Nicholson, who made a lot of news in Guyana when she died, because she was a strong and fierce advocate for women's rights and for domestic violence. But she was also a victim of domestic violence and nobody knew. And in her handwritten letter, apparently from what Joelle said to me, is that she wrote 7 letters and left them for each of her friends. And this was a letter that was addressed to him. And he has since shared it and spoken about it openly, so I can talk about the essence of it. And she said that one of the biggest issues for her to deal with in Guyana was the absence of confidentiality, was the absence of respect for the privacy of what she was sharing. She recounted in her letter that she went to see a mental health professional, a doctor, and the next thing you know, her case is being discussed by other people. She could see her case file openly in a file cabinet that everybody had access to. And there were details and information in there that she didn't want she assumed, quite rightly, that her conversation with this doctor was been held confidential. The other thing that she talked about is that she was sexually propositioned by the doctor, which is blatantly unethical. But more importantly is the issue of confidentiality. That is a huge issue in Guyana. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up as part of my panel discussion at the Diaspora Conference is to say to the Guyana government is that if you want to talk about investment in Guyana and people coming to invest, you've got to develop and build a social infrastructure. You've got to put things in place to protect people. You do not have a comprehensive confidentiality law similar to the HIPAA Act in the United States, or a confidentiality law that is similar to what you have in the United Kingdom or in Canada. You don't have that. You go to Georgetown Public Hospital or any other health center, and your business is discussed among the nurses and nurses' aides, and next thing you know, it's out on the street. Before going to Guyana, I found out about a 42-year-old woman from Linden who died from HIV and AIDS. There was no reason for her to die. But I also found out that all of Linden knew about her. All of Linden knew that she was HIV positive and that she died from AIDS. Actually, matter of fact, and because of that, I went up to Linden on the Monday of my presentation at the conference to do a workshop with the women in Linden. More than 50 women showed up for a workshop in Miracle Times Church in 1 Mile, Wisma, with Pastor Rowley. And we talked about sex, sexuality, mental health, HIV. I asked them, I said, can any of you tell me what is HIV? What does HIV mean? Only about 3 people raised their hands to say they knew what HIV is. But they knew the names, the big truck, the monster, the virus, the thing. Then one woman whispered to me from the front. She said, it's fear that prevents people from even talking about HIV. It's the stigma. And I said, stop. Don't let's use the word stigma. Let's use what we know. It's shame. We talked about mental health as well. And shame, again, surrounds mental health in Guyana. People don't want to talk about it. At the end of the forum, which was supposed to only last 45 minutes, went on for 2.5 hours. At the end of it, a woman stood up. She says, my brother left home this afternoon. I don't know where he is. I heard that he's sleeping somewhere on something, and I don't know if he has anything to eat. I know he's not right in his mind, but I don't know what to do. And I said, this is what you can do. Reach out to the public health official at Linden Public Hospital. Tell them what is going on. Tell them and see if they may be able to send somebody to find him, to take him in, so he does not harm himself or harm somebody else. Another woman stood up. She said, I know of a young man that's going around Linden right now having unprotected sex, and he's HIV positive, and nobody's doing anything about it. I said, well, you go to the hospital and find a public health official there and report it. Tell them who he is and where he can be found, and let them take charge of that.
Antoine, I wanted to get in some questions about DBGM, your focus on mental health for the LGBTQ community and so on. So I'm going to violate my own rule here, and we are out of time, but I think this is important.
Thank you.
So I'm going to give you an opportunity here to, let's, talk a little bit. You have a conference coming up, but before we go to the conference, my mind conferences, when did that get started, and for what reason?
In 2014, the DBGM board had a meeting at a retreat in New Jersey.
And DBGM, that's the acronym for
Press Black Gay Men.
Uh-huh.
So we've since decided that we're not using the full description. We're just going to use the acronym DBGM.
Uh-huh.
And so we had retreat in early 2014, and the board decided at the time that we need to expand the focus of the organization from just simply being focused on black gay men. While we will continue doing that work, but we need to expand and include other LGBT people of color in the communities. And so we decided to reach out, and so we decided we were going to do a summit. So we had the first mental health summit at Rutgers in Newark. It was a one-day summit. The summit started about 8:30 in the morning. By 11, even though it started 8:30, there was a long line of people ready to check in before 8:30, and it went on until 11 o'clock, even though the summit was already underway. At the end of the day, because it was just one day, there were more than 100 people still remaining in the main auditorium. We had to say to them, the summit is over. We have nothing more to tell you. You can leave. And then we realized that this is an urgent need because nobody else is talking about it. The white community have got their stuff already taken care of. But the people of color communities who are most severely impacted and affected because of race and because of homophobia in people of color communities, especially in black communities, they are more affected. So we were able to pull together a team to plan the conference for 2015 at Mount Sinai in Union Square. And at the end of the conference, we have what we call a community speak out, where we encourage everybody who's there at the end of the conference to talk about the conference, what they expect, what they would like to see. And somebody said, this needs to go on for 2 days. And I literally held my head. I was like, y'all must be out. And I said, y'all must be out of y'all mind. You want to do this for 2 days? And I must have been out of my mind because in 2016,
You did it?
we had a 2-day conference at the Alexander Hamilton building.
Was it worth it?
It was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there were a lot of people who came who were impressed. One of the things that we could not do is because it was a federal building, we could not charge a registration. And so there is a psychological construct, or maybe a sociological construct or a tendency that if people got to pay for something, they will show up just to get their money's worth. But if it's for free, they can say they're going, but they don't necessarily, there's no commitment or obligation to show up. So